So if you're asked to make a profile on a target, you find out that a similar target is actually more competitive, more attractive, better fit within your matrix, what you're looking to do strategically. Make a profile on them too. Produce both with your thoughts. Hey, I know you asked me to make a profile on this target. I've done that. But while making this profile, I found this other company that I think is actually much more competitive, much more attractive. So I went ahead, made a profile for them too, and let me know what you think. Should we progress both? My suggestion is that we, insert whatever your thoughts are, advancing the conversation, moving the actions forward. And so that's why I think it just comes down to anticipating needs and then taking initiative when you recognize what those needs are. To me, that's what Greystone leadership is.
Welcome to M&A Science, where leading M&A practitioners share lessons learned from their experience. If you're interested in keeping up with the latest from M&A Science, visit mascience.com and subscribe to our free newsletter. Every Monday, we share highlights from our interviews and invitations to events as we build the greatest community of forward-thinking M&A practitioners. Again, that's mascience.com. I'm your host, Kison, Patel, CEO and founder of M&A Science. This podcast is a little different. Normally, I get the senior M&A folks that have been doing this for decades. Today's a little different. I'm interviewing Caleb, who's pretty new on the block when it comes to M&A, but I got to meet him when he was interning in a corporate development role. I was extremely impressed by his thinking and capabilities and kept in touch with him. It's been a few years, and thought it'd be worth just to see if we can learn some things from the new guys in the industry. So with that, hey, Caleb, how are things going?
It's going great, Kison. Doing what I can to enjoy a cloudy day here in Fort Worth, Texas. Thanks for having me. Cool.
I'm actually excited to interview you. Normally, I get to talk to these hot shots that got decades of M&A experience. And I want to make a point to our listeners today that you can learn a lot from someone that's pretty new in the industry. And in a lot of ways, I think the folks that are newer in the industry are actually more qualified to teach others. So maybe we can just kick things off with a brief on your background.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kison. Yeah, you're exactly right. I'm the new guy on the block. I'm Caleb Shafer. I'm just 26 years old, recent graduate of Texas A&M University. I got a degree in, it's an engineering degree, but it's called industrial distribution. So it's a 60-40 mix of engineering and business. Like I said, I graduated last year, started out in an IMO role, and now I'm a corporate development associate.
What got you interested in M&A?
Oh man, I've always loved the idea of M&A. I had never really ever practiced it though, until I engaged in the sale of a landscaping company I started. Obviously, very different scale that I work at now, but it gave me a little bit of a sense of what sell side is like. And I guess what actually got me into it, what actually got me funneled into this career path was some additional initiative I took during an internship I had in 2020.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about your background. I talked to a lot of folks, and they come from a strong finance background. They come through banking, and they get an M&A. I think we talked before, and it caught my attention is you actually got an internship opportunity, which you don't see too often, that gave you exposure to corporate development. Maybe you can walk through a little bit about that and kind of what are some of the things that you've learned or how you moved into a full-time role?
Yeah. So my internship actually didn't start out as an M&A focused internship. It started out as I was essentially a developer of value-added solutions for the company that I work for, and part of our investment plan that we submitted was doing a voice of customer project. So I was essentially asked to crunch some customer data to produce X insight, but I realized that same data could be used to produce additional insight, which would tell us what customer verticals we should be developing new value added solutions for, and perhaps which customer verticals would be most impactful to our top line if we were to make an acquisition benefiting those customers. So, I produced that insight, that additional insight that came to mind, and the director liked it. He passed it up to his VP of Corp Dev, and then the VP of Corp Dev reached out directly to me. Cameron Ward, he works at Itron now, and he said, "Hey, I like your work. Do you want to start sourcing some M&A targets for me?" So, definitely a backdoor way into M&A, Kison, but I've loved it ever since.
That's actually really interesting as well, because not a lot of folks would actually start on the sourcing side. You tend to be the spreadsheet monkeys. I don't know if that's the appropriate term to use, but you're focused on the modeling aspects, and it's typically much later in your career you start understanding the sourcing aspects.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that. Yeah, I think starting out with sourcing gave me a different view into the strategy that's considered when you build up your pipeline, and that I think was imperative to understand first. Because if I'm imagining a situation where I started in running spreadsheets, doing some modeling and financial valuations, I would sure, you develop the technical skills first, which is really really important, of course. But I would love, now that I've started with sourcing, and now that I'm actually getting into the nitty gritty technical valuations and modeling and stuff, now I know what I'm looking at. Now I know how to digest a P&L and understand the strategic rationale behind why we're doing any sort of data crunching on these companies we're looking at.
Started with a research project that moved you to expanding or contributing to the strategy in M&A that got you still an internship role to work with corporate development. Mm-hmm. What happened next?
So when I was nearing the end of my internship, thanks to some internal networking and honestly just being in a company with wonderful culture where there's just the mix of the right people, some new strategic initiatives were being started and higher prioritized. One of the VPs of Corp Dev at the group level reached out and said, "Hey, I'm standing up an IMO team, and I'm looking for people to add to that." So again, thanks to that internal networking, I had met this individual before. Her name's Jo Faulkner. She leads our integration management office, and she extended the role to me. It looked great on paper, and I was super excited. This was the thing I was looking forward to, Kison. I wanted to get into some higher level strategic viewed or strategic perspective roles, and out of all the other roles that I interviewed for, this checked all the boxes for me.
That won't happen.
Yeah. So I moved into this IMO role, and I felt like I hit the ground. When I started in this IMO role, it felt like the treadmill was on its max setting, and I just jumped on and I tried to keep up with a sprint, from like a dead stop. That's what it felt like. I came out of college at a very different pace, very different working environment. I was used to taking ownership of projects and becoming the leader in whatever sort of group setting I was in, having to understand this cross-functional nature of these projects, and then trying to apply that to a corporate level was just drastically different. I can't even say apples to oranges.
I want to unpack this a little bit because integration is tough. It is one of the hardest pieces of M&A, stages of M&A that you'll go through, but it's ultimately where the value gets created or destroyed.
Totally.
So it's interesting to hear your experience around it, because a lot of it people don't recognize that are involved in other parts of the deal, that ultimately the integration part is really, really tough to execute. I like to hear what went well, what didn't go well.
So I think that a lot of things went well. I scaled up extremely quickly. I began to interface with executives on a totally different level than I was used to before. I had done presentations. I had done these interviews where I'd understand needs and then tailor my presentations or my findings or analysis accordingly. but then to actually work with them on a daily basis, executing on these tasks was a very different. It created a different dynamic that I wasn't used to before. So I had to learn very quickly what executive presence and executive communication really is. And I think today I'm still improving with that. I learned how important confidence is, especially as a junior associate, a junior sort of contributor to the IMO team and corporate development as a whole. I had to become very comfortable with keeping senior executives accountable to what the MIP says, this master integration plan. That was a huge transition for me. That was something I think I'm just now starting to get used to.
What was hard about it? Were they like, "Go away, kid, we're not getting this stuff done"?
Okay. So from my perspective, Kison, I was 25 years old. I've just graduated college and I'm talking with people that have worked longer for one company than I've been alive. Okay. So when you understand that dynamic, and I was keenly aware, maybe they weren't, maybe I was overthinking it. I'll give credence to that. But at the end of the day, I think I became too hyper aware of this difference there. And so I became hesitant to reach out and say, like, I know that we both agreed to this deadline and it's coming up. Can it be delivered on time? Hey, the deadline's been passed. This is very important information. I really need this report back. All right. Hey, group level CFO really needs this information. I need it now. And that sort of assertiveness from 26-year-old to someone who's worked for the same company for 26 years or longer, you have to be okay with that, because at the end of the day, you're all on the same team and you all want the same thing. So it's not an you versus them. It's crucial to understand that you're on the same team working towards the same goal. And I think that's what I think can give junior contributors, people new to corporate development, that confidence to be able to stand up and say, we need to stick to the plan. And if we can't, then let's understand why and communicate how those interdependencies affect other people.
Yeah, that's a unique challenge, career challenge that I think goes a long ways. It could turn into a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
was specifically? Well, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I think just at the end of the day, corporate development is about having a strategic view of where you are today and where you want to go, identifying what those gaps are and being proactive about it. So, and I think that applies both to the personal level as well as like the corporate level, or even a business functional level. And so just seeking to gain a competitive advantage and do better than the competitors rather than just keeping up.
How's M&A different from your other roles?
So understanding first what my other roles were. I did a lot of sales roles. I've been in a number of leadership roles, but primarily dealing with sales management. So going into M&A helped me, I think. So some things that were similar, I was able to use that sales management perspective and apply it to our M&A processes, which has actually led into this Lean Six Sigma Yellow Belt project that I'm doing. And we're driving efficiencies, forming KPIs that haven't been formulated since. And so this is where I think gray zone leadership comes into play. And we can touch on that later. But what I think was very different was the scale and impact of what I'm doing. I've been dealing with a lot of startups, whether they be my own or those that I'm interning for. I was in the talent incubator program at Texas A&M. So it's this cohort of just 30 students out of 1,100 in our major. Now we are selected to do some like business case consulting type projects for. At the end of the day, yes, those companies are paying for a deliverable, but you're sort of in this cocoon where if you fail, it's okay. You're a student. And now you don't really have that backdrop anymore. You don't have that backstop. So it's those things, scale and impact. I'm getting to travel now, which is pretty cool. I thought it was Kison. I was growing up and I saw these executive looking people at the airport with their little carry-on, dressed in business casual, seemingly, on the way, busy about something, having something to do, somewhere to be. And I thought, that's what I want to do. But now that I've started traveling, Kison, I don't know that the hype is all it's made out to be. I actually don't really want to pack. Hotels aren't all that pleasant. You're working long hours. You probably get a lunch, but later than you usually do it, or maybe a dinner's later, and you get back to the hotel at 8 or 9, and then where's where do you wind down? So travel's good intermittently, I think.
Any positives in terms of? Well, I'll go back to
Certainly,
we
yeah,
had
definitely.
we had the IMO role.
Yeah.
That wasn't quite a fit. What happened after that? Because you ended up in corporate development. What did that look like?
Yeah, so that's a really good story, actually. I felt I'm a very creative person, I think, Kison. Just in my own opinion, I think I'm quite creative, and I need space to kind of I need a sandbox to play with, so to speak. And I didn't feel I was getting that with IMO. That's nothing against the organization or the team. I think it's just purely a reflection of what the function is. And it was that I felt as very convergent. It was all about execution. I felt like whack-a-mole, the game whack-a-mole. I was like a task chopper, and so I needed more room to be creative, I'll admit I did have some opportunities to do that where some line items on the integration plan had some interdependencies with some other line items on a different integration plan. And I know, Mr. CEO, creator, founder of Deal Room, you're probably scratching your head like, why are you managing integration on multiple different Excel sheets? But that's just where we were at the time. So I got my area of creativity there, Kison, was understanding these interdependencies and then formulating an automated flow which would automatically update and reduce waste and time on my part. But yeah, so at the end of the day, Kison, my manager Joe, she noticed it probably before I did, honestly. She gave me a few opportunities to have to present what it's like to, how to source targets, what it's like to make a profile, what are you looking for, and things like that. She saw how I kind of came alive during this team presentation that I gave, and asked very insightful and thought-provoking questions that helped me to recognize that I wasn't a good fit for IMO, and IMO wasn't really a good fit for me either. So I was in a secondment at the time. I had never heard of the term before. I think it's primarily used in Europe, but a secondment is essentially an internal temporary reassignment. So my temporary reassignment after I graduated, since I was already working within the company, was into the IMO team. So because of the nature of this contract, and they were able to just essentially transfer or change my secondment into the pre-close side of corp dev. After realizing that we weren't a good fit for one another, it was really just a matter of, all right, well, I've talked with who your line manager would be on the pre-close side. This is what your roles and responsibilities would be. How does that sound? I thought, yeah, that sounds great. Like, let me switch. So I switched over to a corporate development analyst at that point.
That's where you're at today. Well, associate now.
Yeah. I got my first little promotion at the beginning of this month, the beginning of the fiscal year. So it's excited about that.
So now that you're in the industry, what do you think are the skills that people need in order to get into M&A, even without going through that traditional route?
Kison, I think it comes down to gray zone leadership. So this is an article I found on LinkedIn a while. I don't know the author's name off the top of my head, but I'll give them credit. Gray zone leadership to me is becoming aware of the people, processes, and systems at play with whatever you're doing at work. Because when you become more aware of those things, you gain an advantage in detecting what the underlying problems within any of those three things may be. Or alternatively, you're able to answer questions you anticipate stakeholders having. So there's a bit of empathy involved there. But in reality, Kison, it's not expecting someone to say, like, I would encourage gray zone leadership for those people who want to get started in M&A or excel in M&A. I wouldn't tell them I'm expecting you to be a mind reader. And here's why. So for example, let's say we're dealing with an analyst here who's been asked to make a profile on a target, right? I would suggest that that person also do a competitive analysis as part of that target profile while you're at it, and then make a profile on a competitor that you think is actually better than the target that you were asked to make a profile on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you're expanding the scope and doing a little extra legwork to sort of benchmark what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're asked to make a profile on a target, you find out that a similar target is actually more competitive, more attractive, better fit within your matrix where you're what you're looking to do strategically. Make a profile on them too. Produce both with your thoughts. Hey, I know you asked me to make a profile on this target. I've done that. But while making this profile, I found this other company that I think is actually much more competitive, much more attractive. So I went ahead, made a profile for them too, and let me know what you think. Should we progress both? My my suggestion is that we, insert whatever your thoughts are, advancing the conversation, moving the actions forward. And so that's why I think it just comes down to anticipating needs and then taking initiative when you recognize what those needs are. And to me, that's what great zone leadership is.
Figuring out the next steps.
Exactly, moving it forward and starting with empathy and then taking initiative to drive.
What goes into that? I mean, I've seen some of these young guys like you that sort of scale up, and by the time they're 40, they're senior level role, executive, partner, whatever. And I've always, when I talk to those folks and try to understand what drove that success, the common theme I concluded was that they would align themselves with the challenges of the leader they reported to, or even the leader that that person reported to, and they'd understand what problems that they had and would help them solve the bigger problems. That seemed to be the common theme. So there's a little bit of that where it sounds like you're talking about, can you drive towards some of these next steps that broaden that thinking, that
Mm-hmm.
align with what somebody else is going to be trying to solve for anyways.
100%, Kison. I would definitely agree with you. You've got to understand who your key stakeholders are, as well as what their needs are. What are their pain points? What do they wish they didn't have to do every day? Aligning your interests with theirs will then enable you to aligning your interests with theirs then enables you to know what to execute on first, how to prioritize your time. And I think what's absolutely imperative, Kison, is coming at whatever this need you're anticipating with enthusiasm and excitement. Volunteer yourself. Hey, I noticed you keep talking about this. Let's do something about this. I'll go ahead. I'll champion the project. I'll kind of recruit together who these people are. Let me understand the scope from you, and I'll kind of put together some findings, put together a plan, see what you think. How does that sound? Um, and when you volunteer yourself like that, it's hard for people to say no. And if at the end of the day, you're making a material difference, moving a KPI in the right direction, people value that. They appreciate that, and they want to reward that behavior if you're working for the right company. Um, some of the feedback that I've gotten is is how influential my enthusiasm has been. So, and that's just kind of who I am. So people have different personality traits. Enthusiasm is one that I exhibit a lot. So whenever I come at things with that enthusiasm, they find that energy sort of recharging and invigorating. So I try to add that. Everyone has different strengths though, so recognize what your strengths are and find ways to add your strengths to whatever this gray area of tasks are. That gray area being like, that space that exists between people's boundaries, between people's ownership and divisions and such. That stuff where that no one owns. It's like no man's land. You see that something's like creating an inefficiency, something needs to be optimized. There's a communication breakdown. There's not enough collaboration. Two people are working on strategic initiatives, but they're not coordinating together, recognizing that and then pulling them together to formulate something cohesive and aligned. And then bring your own creativity, whatever your strengths are. And then I think lastly, whatever your strengths are, you need to be decisive and you need to take initiative on those decisions that you think need to be made.
Problem solving. It's a lot of problem solving where you're identifying problems, you're solving them without being told to. Ties back to figuring out the next steps. The
Yeah.
motivation piece, that's the one thing I found you can't teach.
Mm.
It's one of the biggest things I look for when I interview candidates for our company is how motivated they are, how much prep they
Mm.
actually did for the interview. What are the indicators do I have in this person just having that drive to figure out what they need to figure out to learn? And then the tougher part is figuring out potential from there, where
Yeah.
what's their ability to really figure out the next steps and take initiatives. Um, but what do you think? Is that am I off? Is that something? Can you actually get people motivated? How does that work? How have you found that within
So
your role?
yeah, I think motivation is something that's learned, and I would also argue that it can be
I
taught.
disagree with you. I want to hear your argument on that.
Okay. Okay. I respect that. I think it can be learned. So that part of my argument is I learned motivation when when I started my first landscaping company. I started at 15. I was too young to have a real job. I lost all my friends because I was making bad decisions and had to make better ones. And then none of my other friends really wanted to make those better decisions with me. And so I wanted to make good use of my time. I started a company. Long story short, I passed out 250 flyers. I only got one call, but that call resulted in a lot of referrals. And then I had too much demand that I could supply. So I hired some friends to make up the difference and just charged more than I paid them. That was really at the end of the day. But that experience and understanding that the scale of the company was the scale of the company, the reach, the success of that company was limited to my ambition and my strategic thinking, my plans and such. While at a very small scale, yes, it was this single city landscaping company. I was 16 years old, starting out with my grandpa's equipment. I realized that I could create my own opportunities, and that's why I think entrepreneurship is a very impactful sort of component for someone to have in their background. So understand that first, anything is possible. Okay. Anything is possible. Shoot your shot and just create your own opportunities. That's what I think it comes down to. And at least for me, when I learn motivation. And then the reason why I think you can teach motivation is because you can transform a culture into being a performance driven culture. Some people just don't think like that. They don't know to use data, to use metrics to make business decisions. But you certainly can do that when you understand how to manipulate financial statements, for example. So if you can teach someone, hey, your margin's down, why is that? Teach them how to dig into that, find out what that sort of switch was that caused the margin to drop, then find out how to switch it back or switch it to the entire other direction and actually improve margin. Once they find out that can be done, and then they experience the result and the reward that comes from driving true change, I think that's what creates a business culture. And so in that way, when you're performance driven, I think that's what really motivation is.
Interesting view. I'm not quite sold yet. Your early example with you and your friends, it's just something you had from the beginning. You were driven because you wanted to do something bigger and better. But I think there is some truth to that. You can enable more. You can expand on what people have if you can get teams aligned on the right mission.
Yeah,
But there is a bit of a what do you call the inertia that has to be there.
totally.
Otherwise, it's just hard to get something that's not in motion to actually get there.
Yeah. And I think what you just mentioned, inertia, is extremely important when you make the distinguishment between hiring someone that's not performance driven and acquiring a company that's not performance driven. Because if you're acquiring a company, this is in my limited experience. Okay. I'm 26 years old. So, the way Caleb sees the world is that if you're acquiring a company that doesn't have a performance driven culture, I think some key strategic hires, perhaps pulling them from other parts of the business and putting them in the right place, can influence the culture to become more performance driven. But you definitely can't start from scratch there. You've got to have some key stakeholders. Again, it's understanding those key stakeholders who are the most influential people in that business that can drive change, and joining up with them to expand whatever that result is that you're trying to drive. Yeah, just my own opinion.
Yeah, but like, what's the advice you'd give to, because you've been in the seat as a junior person in the company.
Mhm.
So taking the audience here of some folks that are on the senior side, we got some VPs of corp dev, and what would you tell them to best enable your junior level talent?
That's a good question. I think to enable your junior talent to drive change to be more effective than whatever the job description says, I think you've got to break down barriers for them. You've got to help them understand and sort of integrate the fact that it's okay to pass feedback back to you bottom up. Um, I think it's important that these senior leaders who have a junior person on their team also help those junior leaders understand that they have the capability, um, that they sort of have, like, let's call it the leash. They have enough leash to play with to drive some change if they want to use that leash, and then work with that junior leader to understand what's going on in their head, where they see pitfalls, and if they're facing obstacles, work with them to break those obstacles down. Those can be communication. Sometimes information is siloed. Sometimes it's just getting the okay from them. Hey, I'm seeing that we need some KPIs in our M&A process because we don't have any. Can I start that project? And if you're going to say no to that, then you should be looking at the mirror when you wonder why your junior members aren't going above and beyond.
I got two themes out of it. One is freedom to create, and the other is to build a feedback loop.
Yeah, and enable those junior members.
And it's part of freedom to create.
Yeah, having the freedom. Yeah.
Like, if you encourage that, where people are comfortable trying new things, bringing ideas to the table, taking a risk on things like that. If you can really encourage that, lead it by example, that's defining that culture of freedom to create, and then making sure you're getting a feedback loop so you know where people are having challenges, what's working, what's not working, but making sure that it's an iterative process that we continuously learn and evolve from it.
I think a key differentiating factor in what my company has done to enable me to drive change and go above and beyond is how prevalent continuous improvement is throughout the entire company, and the fact that there are stakeholders, who own driving driving continuous improvement initiatives down even through the most junior members. So across the entire company, the various companies within our group level, we've got someone who owns continuous improvement initiatives, and then they have some people that they report to them, and then they can then assist those people like me who are junior level people who notice an inefficiency in a process, and then enable them to not only learn to think in a continuous improvement way, but also then to actually help them execute through that and make that just a part of the way we work. Because continuous improvement, true continuous improvement, like Lean Six Sigma, this is just, agile, that sort of like body of knowledge, that should be the way you work. If it's something additional you do, then it's not effective there. So having this is all just to say, Kison, that having a continuous improvement person heading up these initiatives enables me to know how to execute on these continuous improvement measures to drive change. This is kind of long-winded, but I think I'm there at the end now.
Yeah, so I'm going to do a new thing this next month. I got a cohort of about 3 folks joining our company.
Okay.
And I remember it was probably 8, 10 years ago. I read the book Lean Management, and that was a cool book
Mm.
because you got old TPS system. You learned where a lot of
Oh,
the
nice.
agile concepts originate from. A lot of the Kaizen, right, continuous improvement. And
Hmm.
what was interesting was when they brought in a new manager to the team, they just all they had them do initially was observe and document ways to improve.
Yeah.
And they would come back and say that's not good enough. Like that's you know come up with more. And they just kept
Uh,
doing that. They kept doing that, but they were wiring them for that continuous improvement mindset.
yeah.
And that's what I'm doing. Going to do with this new cohort is one, take the same approach, saying, hey, as we go through this, I want you to document every area that you think we can improve as a company, whatever it
Oh,
is.
yeah.
And I'm going to go back to the existing team with that same challenge, saying, hey, this is what I want everybody to do. And I'm going to supplement it with that same uh, ways to improve for the CEO.
Oh, yeah. That's powerful stuff. Because I think top-down leadership does have its place. There's some things where there's some initiatives, some key drivers of change that the top leaders do need to own. They do need to champion, and then sort of proliferate throughout whoever their line, whoever reports to them, and whoever reports to them throughout whatever their function is. But there is an element of bottom up leadership that I think is actually crucial because, let's say some VP says, hey, we need to increase our services offering. How do we do that? Well, I've got this idea of how we do that. So I'm going to hand that down to my managers. And certainly they can then tell their junior contributors to execute on this process that they've been given. But it's those junior contributors who are living and breathing that process. So provide the space for those junior contributors to pass the feedback back up and say, hey, this process is going great, but here were some missteps. Here are some inefficiencies that I've discovered by using this process. So let's like tune this in a little bit. Maybe you can actually cut out a step there if senior leaders collaborate with those junior contributors on them delivering the vision, and then the junior contributor sort of brainstorming with that leader on how to actually execute. That may actually take out a step there and eliminate some waste.
Well, that's what it comes down to is creating that communication platform where you have those ideas or even pointing out where the cracks are appearing, coming up. What kind of format do you think works well to create that? For us, it's always been about stand-up meetings, like really
Mm.
trying to do those things, but then having these informal meetings where that's what you're encouraging. You're really trying to encourage that opportunity for everybody to be able to speak up and share those ideas. And I've always got great stories and examples of one where it's the most junior developer on the team shared an idea for product feature
Mm.
that today became one of the leading things that we've actually created. But it was the fact that we enabled that to give them the opportunity to speak up, because it's always our town halls are, hey, not only ask questions, but what are some ideas that you can bring that we can improve as a company? I don't know. Have you seen anything like that, a format or some approach that could help enable that?
So I think working remotely, working from home is extremely value add in that it usually provides people with more time to actually execute, to live out the process, and then to make collaboration at sometimes more efficient, because at any moment you can say, hey, I'm working through this process. I've got a couple ideas. Can I grab you for 5 minutes? So touching on your point about informal meetings, that's been key for me, is knowing that I can reach out to the VP of Corp Dev, or maybe and then maybe a manager, whomever it may be. Really, at the end of the day, it's just roping in whoever those key stakeholders are into an informal meeting and say, hey, I'm working on this project. Realize that this kind of affects you in this way, or here's an interdependency that affects your division. I want to present what my findings are and get some feedback, and let's improve this. Then when it's time to present, then let's open up the scope just a little bit on who's involved and ensure that there's alignment across the team. So when it comes to format, I think there does need to be a mix of online meetings as well as in person. Some of the most effective meetings, and some of the meetings I would add where I actually learned the most, were those meetings that I had in person. You just get so much more out of it that just kind of slips through the cracks when you're talking online. So if you have the opportunity to come together, bounce some ideas off of one another with a whiteboard on the wall, then I think you're going to maximize the impact that you can get from whatever it is you're discussing.
That's a good point. The one-on-one component of it, to encourage that. And then it sounds like the transparency piece made me think of, for us, we use Slack and we create these channels.
Mm-hmm.
Even last night, I got my creative hour around 9 p.m. and I
Mm-hmm.
threw 2 ideas out in the marketing channel, but it goes across to everybody, and then they get to chime in if they love it, hate it, whatnot.
Cool.
But yeah, no, that's really good. Tell me about your current role. What are you doing now?
So,
like, how are you involved with deals today?
So today, I'm primarily responsible for the management of our Americas M&A pipeline. I speak Spanish as a second language. I'm quite fluent in it, so I'm able to leverage that where I need to, depending on any target or region we're looking at. And there's a part of managing this Americas M&A pipeline involved the industrialization of the process whereby we can actually get targets to move down our funnel. And then secondarily, I participate and contribute to active and closing DD, both in person and remote.
You're managing the diligence process?
Not quite, not yet.
Okay. What do you do then?
When it comes to active and closing DD?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'll be honest with you, Kison, I've only really been involved in 2 different DD processes. And so because of that, a lot of my time spent in those meetings is just spent learning and absorbing. I'm taking notes. I'm able to kind of sit back as a fly on the wall and listen to the comments being made. I make notes where something is talked about that I don't understand, if it's like net debt and debt like items or working capital and how that affects valuation or whatever the case may be. But then I'll also kind of make a connection. For example, we had a recent meeting with a legal due diligence team on site, and we were talking through the terms, and I realized I sort of made the connection back to a prior meeting that we had with our tech DD team on site, and they mentioned the some potential pitfalls with some of the technology that they were evaluating. So one way that I contributed to this DD process was that I sort of connected that dot from the tech side to the legal side and said, hey, we're seeing a lot of red flags here. Can we add some clauses into our SPA which address some of those red flags to a reasonable degree? We looked around and said, yeah, that sounds good. I think that's a reasonable ask. And that's something that will actually shore up some or sort of hedge the risk that's inherent with this deal. So I felt really good being able to contribute in that way. It's kind of small, but I'm still a junior level contributor, and I'm doing what I can to make a difference where I'm able to.
Got it. So you're moving towards that area of actually getting involved to manage diligence.
Yeah.
Tell me, what are some lessons learned? What are things you learned around the front end pipeline sourcing?
Yeah. So you've got to be intimately aware with the people, processes, and systems at play. I find that the Lean Six Sigma approach really helps to refine those 3 things pretty well. And in addition to that, whatever your target database is, you need to get intimately aware with that too. So SEALC, Privco for private company financials, Orbis for those international targets. Companies that are internationally listed makes it a lot easier to find all the relevant information. Deal room, if you're lucky enough to get that involved in your organization, ask for demos from those account execs, and look for ways to fully leverage that subscription you're paying for. And then lastly, we've kind of talked about this already, Kison, but continue to think divergently wherever you can, and create choices and find ways to optimize whatever that choice you have to make will be.
Great tips. How about advice for people aspiring to get into M&A?
Yeah. So again, we've talked about it before, but it's that gray zone leadership. So, we mentioned what some of the common issues were earlier, but some tips on being a gray zone leader. I would say seek to strengthen the organization and not grandstanding for your own personal gain. And to me, that means making heroes out of the individuals around you, and growing the influence of those other people in the process, giving them a hand in a project that you've started, sort of seeks to, what's the term? Or what's the phrase? It's a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's what you want to do when you're part of an organization, when you're part of a team. It's not us versus them. Everyone's on the same team. You want to focus on understanding and supporting the priorities of your line managers, whomever those may be, and try to, again, align your interests, your priorities, and choose opportunities that will make a material difference. Be empathic with who those stakeholder managers are, and tune in to strategic executive initiatives, and see how you can use your strengths to sort of to become a leader and an owner, become accountable for those things that are not that nothing's happening with, I guess. Does that make sense?
Not really. But
no.
Okay.
Yeah. So gray zone issues, these are things that no one owns, but they're obvious issues, they're concerns, inefficiencies,
Yep.
Lack of collaboration, coordination, things like that. Find out what those are, take ownership from them, or take ownership of them, and see what you can do to add your strengths to maximize the benefit that comes from that project. And that sort of then makes that, I think, is gray zone leadership. We talked about it earlier. So again, so going back to your question, advice for people aspiring to get into the industry: be a gray zone leader. Know that anything is possible. So create your own opportunities, and then just shoot your shot. Any question is going to be a no, as long as you haven't asked it. It could end up being a no still, but if you at least ask it, if you at least shoot your shot, it's only then that you give yourself a chance of showing how much value you can add to an organization.
Be forward and get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, exactly.
Caleb, what's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
Kison, I kind of think that me being here is one of the craziest things I've seen in M&A. I've only been here for 2 years, Kison, so I haven't seen everything. But I remember the first due diligence process I was involved in. We traveled on site. We met with the leaders of the company, and they had a very different idea of the post-integration model. The ideal operating model is very different than the one that we came up with. Basically, it just came down to go-to-market approach. And what stood out to me was that those 5+ days of meetings started with our leadership. So our leadership started the very first meeting with understanding where the leaders' heads were, what their vision was, understanding their pain points, and just starting with empathy, seeking to understand before being understood. And so later on, when we started to understand where this difference was, I think it was that starting with empathy that enabled that facilitated the openness of the leadership of the other target to really give some serious consideration to what our vision was. And so while our vision didn't change, nor did nor did their vision change. It was because we started with empathy that we were able to collaborate on what a unified go-to-market approach would be. So, Kison, it was so cool. I kind of heard the back and forth, and then someone was like, "Oh, well, what if we did this?" And then it was like a volley. It was like a perfect tennis match, hitting back and forth, brainstorming these ideas back and forth until we came up with, people were coming out of their seats, they were walking around the room, and I was sitting there again as a fly on the wall taking notes, and I'm just like hammering away at the keyboard, and as I'm seeing these leaders come together on what their unified go-to-market approach would be, and it was exhilarating. It was so cool for me, Kison. I grew a lot from that experience.
You are ahead of your time, my friend. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I learned some things and enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Kison. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Cheers. Here's to the deal.
Yeah. Cheers to the deal, Kison.